June 19, 1944. Dawn light fractures across the Philippine Sea, turning the Pacific horizon into molten copper. 300 miles northeast of Guam, Japanese pilot Warrant Officer Toshiyuki Sueda climbs into the cockpit of his A6M-0 fighter, running his gloved hand along the familiar instrument panel. 9 confirmed kills mark his service record. 9 American aircraft torn from the sky using tactics perfected over China, refined through countless engagements since Pearl Harbor. He does not know that within hours, a new American fighter will transform the entire calculus of Pacific air combat. He does not know that his climbing loop maneuver, the technique that has kept him alive through 3 years of war, will become his executioner. The Imperial Japanese Navy entered the Battle of the Philippine Sea believing their skilled aviators still held qualitative superiority over American forces. Their confidence rested on hard-earned victories across the Pacific. The Zero had dominated early war engagements with its extraordinary maneuverability, its ability to outturn and outclimb any Allied fighter at medium altitudes. Japanese pilots trained for years under brutal selection programs that accepted only the elite. But by June 1944, that elite cadre had been systematically destroyed. At Midway, Japan lost over 100 irreplaceable veteran aviators. At Guadalcanal, the attrition continued. The training pipeline, once producing superbly skilled pilots after 2 years of intensive instruction, had collapsed into abbreviated courses, churning out inexperienced flyers with barely 300 hours of flight time. The men climbing into cockpits that morning were shadows of the warriors who had struck Pearl Harbor. They were sacrificial offerings sent against an enemy that had learned, adopted, and built a killing machine specifically designed to annihilate them.
The Grumman F6F Hellcat appeared unremarkable to Japanese intelligence analysts. Another American fighter, heavier than the Zero, less maneuverable in turning engagements. Japanese pilots had faced the clumsy F4F Wildcat and learned its weaknesses, developed tactics to exploit its inability to follow the Zero through high G turns and climbing loops. They expected more of the same. What they encountered instead was a predator that refused to play by the old rules. Ensign Robert Duncan, flying one of the first Hellcats into combat in the fall of 1943, met Warrant Officer Sueda over the Pacific. Sueda initiated his signature maneuver, the climbing loop that had killed 9 American pilots. He pulled his Zero vertical, expecting the pursuing American fighter to stall and fall away, presenting an easy deflection shot. But Duncan's Hellcat, powered by a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, followed Sueda through the climb without hesitation. The American pilot kept his guns aligned. Sueda realized his mistake in the final second before Duncan's 60-50 caliber machine guns tore his aircraft apart. His first encounter with the Hellcat was his last. The shock rippled through Japanese naval aviation like a seismic wave. Pilots who survived initial engagements with Hellcats returned to their carriers with reports that seemed impossible. The new American fighter was faster, climbed better, dove faster, and carried armor protection that allowed it to absorb punishment that would have destroyed a Zero. More devastating, American pilots had abandoned the turning dogfight entirely. They used the Hellcat's speed advantage to dictate engagement terms, diving from altitude, firing, and extending away before Japanese pilots could respond. The thatch-weave defensive formation made it nearly impossible to isolate individual American aircraft. Veteran Japanese pilots, men who had survived dozens of missions, found themselves outmatched by American rookies flying superior machinery, supported by sophisticated radar direction. The mathematical reality became inescapable. Every engagement cost Japan more pilots it could not replace, while American industrial capacity launched new Hellcats from assembly lines faster than Japan could train aviators to oppose them.
Measurable category. Some Japanese pilots, realizing the hopelessness of their situation as Hellcats tore through their formations, attempted desperate maneuvers. Historical accounts document instances of pilots trying to land on American-held airfields, their aircraft shot to pieces, fuel exhausted, knowing that continuing combat meant certain death. Across the 24 months of Hellcat combat operations from 1943 to 1945, the aircraft achieved a confirmed kill-to-loss ratio of 19-1. In 66,000 combat sorties, Hellcat pilots claimed 5,163 aerial victories at a cost of 270 aircraft lost to enemy action. This represented 56% of all United States Navy and Marine Corps air-to-air victories in the Pacific Theater. The statistics concealed individual human tragedies: Japanese pilots who watched their wingmen explode under concentrated machine gun fire, who heard the last radio transmissions of squadron mates, who returned to carriers that would never return to port. The symbolic meaning of the Hellcat transcended its technical specifications. It represented American industrial capacity translated into overwhelming tactical advantage. Japanese pilots flew aircraft built by hand in factories bombed by B-29s. American pilots flew fighters mass-produced in facilities that delivered 12,000 Hellcats in 30 months. Democracy's promise of abundance, of resources marshaled by free peoples, manifested in formations of blue-gray fighters that darkened Pacific skies. The war ended with Japan's aerial forces reduced to kamikaze desperation, pilots so poorly trained they could barely fly straight, sent on one-way missions because conventional combat had become mathematically impossible. The Hellcat remained operational until the final day, its guns falling silent only when Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled across Japanese radios announcing surrender. In the silence that followed, the deeper truth emerged. Air superiority in modern warfare belonged not to the most maneuverable aircraft or the most spiritually dedicated pilots, but to the nation that could combine superior technology with superior numbers and superior training systems. The Hellcat killed the myth of Japanese aerial invincibility. It demonstrated that wars of aggression against industrial democracies carried a terrible price, paid in young men falling from Pacific skies, their formations shredded by a fighter they had been taught could never exist. The metallic roar of the R-2800 engine became the sound of totalitarian ambition collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, the requiem for an empire that gambled everything on early victories and lost when America simply built more, trained better, and fought smarter than any military philosophy could overcome.